Sister Maria lived quietly in a small convent far from busy cities. The convent was peaceful, surrounded by trees, birds, and silence. Every day followed the same routine. The bell would ring at dawn, prayers would begin, and then the sisters would go about their tasks. But inside Maria's heart, there was something different. She carried a memory from her childhood, a time when music filled her home. Her father used to play piano while her mother sang softly. Maria would sit nearby, listening with a smile. When she became a nun, she left that world behind. The convent had strict rules, and one of them was that music for pleasure was not allowed. It was seen as a distraction, a worldly joy that could take the mind away from prayer. Still, every day when Maria walked through the chapel, she couldn't help but glance at the old piano standing in the corner. Its wood was scratched, its keys were dusty, but it seemed to call out to her quietly. No one touched it, no one even spoke about it. Maria often paused by the piano when no one was around. She would gently touch the keys, feeling the cold smoothness beneath her fingers. Her heart would ache, remembering how she used to play simple tunes as a girl, but here, she couldn't play. She wasn't allowed. The other sisters lived peacefully without music. For them, silence was holy. The rhythm of prayer and work was enough. But for Maria, something felt missing. It was as if a part of her soul was asleep. At night, when all the sisters were asleep, Maria sometimes sat by her small window. She would look at the stars and imagine the sound of piano music floating into the sky. She missed the feeling of pressing a key and hearing a note come alive. Days turned into months. But the desire inside her never faded. She kept it hidden. She followed all the convent's rules. She prayed, worked in the garden, helped in the kitchen, and cared for the sick. Outwardly, she was a perfect nun, but inside she longed for music. One afternoon, something unusual happened. A visitor arrived at the convent. She was an older woman who had come to donate books and small items from her late husband's home. Among the items was a worn leather folder filled with old sheet music. The visitor spoke kindly to the Mother Superior and handed over the music sheets. "My husband loved music," she said softly. "Maybe someone here will find peace in these notes." Maria's heart beat faster as she watched from a distance. She felt drawn to the folder, wondering what beautiful melodies were written inside. Later that day, after the visitor had left and the sisters returned to their duties, Maria quietly approached the folder where it had been placed on a shelf. She opened it carefully and found page after page of handwritten music. The notes seemed to dance on the paper. One piece caught her eye. It was a simple lullaby, written in gentle, flowing notes. Just looking at it made her feel calm and full of emotion. She wondered how it would sound, how her fingers would feel playing it on the piano in the chapel. That night, after evening prayers, Maria lay awake in her bed. The convent was silent, but her mind was filled with music. She thought about the piano sitting there, unused, forgotten, covered in dust. She knew she wasn't allowed to play. The rules were clear, but her heart kept asking. Just one time, the next evening, after everyone had gone to sleep, Maria quietly left her small room. She moved gently down the hallway, careful not to make a sound. When she reached the chapel, she paused, listening. The building was quiet, filled only with the soft creaks of old wood. She stepped toward the piano and sat on the bench. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy cover. The keys were as she remembered, smooth, waiting. She placed the sheet music on the stand and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and then, slowly, she pressed the first note. A soft, beautiful sound filled the air. Maria closed her eyes and let her fingers move. The lullaby came alive, each note gentle and full of feeling. In that moment she felt free, though she knew she could be caught, though she knew this was against the rules. Her heart felt light. The piano and her soul seemed to speak the same language. And as the music filled the empty chapel, something deep inside her awoke. Maria knew that this night would change everything. The next morning, Maria felt both nervous and happy. Her hands still remembered the feeling of the keys from the night before, but she kept quiet, moving through her daily chores like nothing had happened. No one seemed to notice anything different, yet inside her heart was beating faster. She couldn't stop thinking about the music. During breakfast, the sisters sat together as usual, eating in silence, but Maria noticed something small. The Mother Superior looked thoughtful as she stirred her tea. Her eyes drifted toward the chapel for a brief moment. Maria wondered if the music had been heard. Had someone woken up? Would there be questions? Would she get punished? Later that day, Maria returned to the chapel to clean. It was part of her daily routine, but today felt special. She dusted the altar, arranged the candles, and swept the floor carefully. When she reached the piano, she paused. There was a faint layer of dust on the bench. She wiped it gently, smiling to herself. Suddenly a voice spoke behind her. "It's been a long time since anyone touched that piano," said one of the older sisters quietly. Maria froze for a moment. Then she turned around and nodded politely. The older sister didn't seem angry. Instead, she gave Maria a small smile. "I used to play once too," the sister whispered. Then she walked away without another word. That short conversation stayed with Maria all day. She realized she wasn't the only one who had feelings for the piano. Perhaps the other sisters also had dreams they kept hidden. But in this convent, dreams stayed silent. As the evening came, Maria couldn't help herself. She returned to the piano again after prayers. This time she played a little longer. Her fingers moved with more confidence. The simple lullaby she had found in the folder turned into a gentle song that wrapped itself around the cold stone walls. But what Maria didn't know was that someone was listening. Outside the chapel door, two sisters stood quietly. They didn't interrupt her, they just listened, their eyes shining softly in the candlelight. The next day, things began to feel different. The sisters greeted Maria with warmer smiles, even though no one spoke about the music. She felt a shift in the air. It was as if her playing had awakened, not just the old piano, but something inside the sisters as well. Days passed like this. Every night, Maria would slip into the chapel and play, sometimes simple melodies, sometimes a tune she remembered from childhood. She felt alive again, and so did the piano. Then, late one evening, Maria returned to the chapel and found something unexpected. On top of the piano was a single red flower and a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a note written in delicate handwriting. "Your music brings peace to my heart. Please don't stop." Maria looked around, but no one was there. She sat at the piano, her eyes full of tears but her heart full of warmth. She realized she was not alone in her love for music. The piano, once locked in silence, was now becoming the heart of the convent. Maria placed the note gently beside the music sheets. Then she sat down and began to play. Her music flowed freely now. Each note filled the chapel with hope. Her secret was no longer hers alone. Her music had become a gift, and she knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. Maria's nights at the piano became her quiet joy. Every evening after prayers, when the convent was still, she would return to the chapel. Her music was no longer shy or hesitant. It was flowing, gentle but full of life. Each note felt like it was breathing new energy into the cold stone walls. But what Maria didn't know was that her music was changing things beyond herself. The sisters, who once stayed silent in their rooms at night, now sat quietly by their doors just to listen. Some stayed awake longer than usual, waiting for those gentle sounds to fill the halls. Though no one spoke about it openly, a new warmth had begun spreading through the convent. One evening, as Maria walked past the garden after supper, a younger sister gently stopped her. Her voice was soft. "The music, it's beautiful. It helps me sleep peacefully. Thank you." Maria smiled but said nothing. She knew she couldn't admit it was her at the piano. It was still a rule she was breaking. Even though no one seemed angry, she felt she must keep it a quiet gift. Inside, however, she felt lighter. For so long, she had kept her love for music hidden. Now, it was becoming something shared. Even if silently, the piano, once forgotten and dusty, was bringing peace. It was as if music itself was healing not just her heart but the whole community. The Mother Superior watched everything quietly. She noticed the change in the sisters. They smiled more during the day. They worked together with a lightness that had been missing for years. The garden looked brighter. The meals felt more joyful, and the air around the convent seemed warmer. All of this because of music. The Mother Superior did not stop Maria. She let the music continue, even though the rules were clear. But deep down, she was struggling between duty and the feeling of comfort the music brought. One rainy evening, Maria entered the chapel as usual, but tonight felt different. A small candle was lit on the piano. Beside it sat a fresh piece of sheet music. Carefully placed, Maria picked it up and saw that it was another handwritten song, simple but beautiful. There was no name, no note attached. Someone had left it for her. Maria felt a mix of surprise and joy. Who was supporting her? Who wanted her to keep playing? Her fingers trembled as she placed the music on the stand. Slowly she began to play. The notes were soft at first, but soon her confidence grew. The music filled the chapel like a gentle rain, and unknown to her, outside the chapel door, several sisters were standing in silence. Even the Mother Superior was there. They didn't enter, they didn't interrupt, they just listened. That night, something special happened. When Maria finished playing, she turned around and was surprised. Near the door, the Mother Superior was standing alone. Her face was calm, her eyes soft. Without saying a word, the Mother Superior slowly walked over to the piano and sat beside Maria. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then quietly, the Mother Superior lifted her hand and pressed a key. A single soft note echoed in the chapel. Maria watched her with gentle curiosity. The Mother Superior placed both hands on the keys and, with a shaky but short touch, played a simple melody. It was short, and her fingers were not as smooth as Maria's, but the tune was full of emotion. When she finished, she whispered, "It has been many years since I played. I thought I had forgotten." Maria didn't speak, but her eyes showed warmth and understanding. In that silent moment, two generations connected through music. No titles, no rules, no fear, just music. The next day, the Mother Superior made an unexpected decision. During breakfast, she spoke softly but clearly. "From today onward, I will allow music to be played in the chapel at night, but it must remain gentle, peaceful, and a gift for the soul. Let it be something that brings us closer to grace." The sisters looked at one another. some with wide eyes, some smiling quietly. Maria felt her heart filled with relief and happiness. Her secret was no longer a secret. Music, once forbidden, was now welcomed. The piano was no longer just a dusty instrument. In the corner, it had become a symbol of shared peace and silent healing. That evening, for the first time, Maria sat at the piano while several sisters quietly gathered in the chapel. Some sat in prayer, some simply closed their eyes and listened. Maria played softly, her fingers moving gently over the keys. The notes floated through the air like a blessing. In that moment, the chapel felt different, alive, warm, and full of light. The piano's secret was now known by all, and for Maria, the music she had once hidden was now a gift she could freely share. The evenings at the convent began to change. It was no longer just Maria sitting at the piano alone in the dark chapel. Now, every night after supper and evening prayers, a few sisters quietly gathered to listen. Some would sit on the wooden benches with their heads bowed in thought. Others would close their eyes and let the soft sounds of the piano carry them somewhere peaceful. The music had become part of their daily life. The old rules that once kept it silent were slowly fading. Even the Mother Superior would sometimes sit quietly in the back, her face calm but touched with a gentle smile. Maria still played carefully. She chose simple melodies, nothing loud, nothing that would disturb the stillness of the chapel. But each note she played felt like a prayer in itself, and her music seemed to help everyone breathe a little easier. One evening, after Maria had finished a soft song, one of the sisters approached her shyly. She held something in her hand, a small wooden flute. "I used to play," she whispered, almost afraid to admit it. Maria smiled kindly and nodded. The sister sat beside her, and together they began to make quiet music. The soft piano and the gentle sound of the flute blended beautifully. The other sisters listened in awe. For years they had followed strict silence, but now their hearts felt lighter. Word of this quiet change began to spread beyond the convent walls. A woman from the nearby village came to light a candle one evening. She sat quietly in the back and listened to the music. When she returned home, she told her neighbors about the peaceful music she had heard. Soon more villagers started visiting in the evenings, not for big concerts or grand performances, just to sit and feel the calm. Some would stay only for a few minutes. Others would stay until the last note was played, but all left with a quiet peace in their hearts. Maria never sought attention. She played because it made her heart feel full, but she noticed how the faces of visitors softened as they listened, how their shoulders seemed less heavy when they left. The music was doing something special, even outside the convent. Inside the convent, the sisters began sharing old memories, stories about when they were younger, when music had once been part of their lives before they joined the chapel, which once felt cold and quiet, now felt warm and alive, even in silence. The sisters felt closer to one another. One rainy afternoon, as Maria tended the small garden outside, the Mother Superior joined her. They worked side by side, pulling weeds and watering the plants. After a while, the Mother Superior spoke softly. "Many years ago, I too loved music. I played piano as a girl, before I came here. But when I became Mother Superior, I thought it best to set music aside. Now, I wonder if that was a mistake." Maria listened quietly. She didn't offer advice or judgment. Instead, she simply said, "Music is like a kind friend who never really leaves us." The Mother Superior nodded slowly. That night, when Maria sat at the piano, the Mother Superior surprised everyone by joining her again. This time, she played a short hymn from memory. Her fingers were not perfect, but the music was beautiful because it was sincere. The sisters watched with warmth in their hearts. This simple act felt like healing. The rigid walls of rules and silence were giving way to something softer, something more human. Music had opened a door to memories, emotions, and connection, and Maria's courage to touch the keys that first night had made it all possible. The convent was still a place of prayer, but now the prayers came not just in words, but in music. Soft melodies floated through the air each evening, wrapping the convent in peace and light. Visitors continued to come quietly. Some brought flowers, some brought candles, some simply sat and listened, their eyes closed, their faces peaceful. Maria kept playing, not for praise or applause, but because music was now part of their way of life. The piano was no longer just an old instrument in a corner. It was a companion, a voice for what could not be said. And every night, when Maria sat at the piano bench, she felt grateful that she had dared to play. The convent's evening music had become a quiet tradition. What started as Maria's private moment had grown into something much bigger. The sisters now looked forward to the soft music filling the chapel each night. Even the Mother Superior, it seemed lighter, smiling more often. The change was gentle but clear. The convent felt warmer, more alive. Outside the convent, villagers were noticing too. Word had spread that something special was happening inside those stone walls. It wasn't just prayer anymore, it was music that wrapped around the heart and calmed the soul. At first, only a few visitors would stop by quietly in the evenings, but soon, more people began to come, sitting silently in the back pews, just to listen. One evening, an older man from the village came forward after Maria finished playing. He spoke softly. "I lost my wife many years ago, but tonight, when I heard that hymn, it felt like she was sitting beside me again. Thank you." Maria didn't know what to say. She only nodded gently, her heart full of emotion. She realized then that her music was doing more than just filling the chapel, it was helping people heal. Soon, some villagers began leaving small gifts. Fresh flowers appeared at the altar. A family donated a candle stand so visitors could light candles during the evening music. Everything was offered quietly, respectfully. Inside the convent, more sisters began opening up about their pasts. Many of them had once played music too. One sister shared that she had played the violin as a young girl. Another admitted she used to sing but had forgotten the sound of her own voice. Maria listened to all their stories with care. She realized how many dreams had been left behind when the sisters took their vows. But now, music was gently bringing those memories back. Not in a way that broke their peace, but in a way that healed it. Even the convent itself seemed to reflect the change. The garden looked brighter, the halls felt warmer. Visitors who came at sunset would often say, "This place feels different now, it feels alive." The Mother Superior decided to quietly allow these small changes to continue. She didn't make a big announcement, but she did something important. She placed a small sign near the entrance of the chapel. It simply read, "Evening music, all welcome, come for peace, come for prayer, come for healing." That simple sign made a big difference. Now, each evening felt like a shared experience between the sisters and the outside world. No sermons, no speeches, just music. One evening, as Maria sat at the piano, she noticed a small child sitting near the front. The girl was no older than 10 and sat quietly next to an elderly woman. Her eyes were wide and full of wonder as she watched Maria's fingers move across the keys. After the music ended, the child approached Maria. Her voice was small but sincere. "I want to learn to play too. Someday will you teach me?" Maria's heart melted. She smiled gently. "One day, you will play beautifully," she said softly. She didn't promise lessons, but she gave the child something else, hope. That night, Maria reflected on how far things had come when she first sat at this piano. It was out of quiet longing, a secret act she thought she'd have to hide forever. Now her music had become part of life at the convent and part of life for many villagers too. The sisters had grown closer, sharing old stories and memories. The villagers had found a peaceful place to visit in the evenings. Even the Mother Superior seemed happier, quietly allowing this new tradition to blossom. Maria knew the path ahead would not always be easy. Rules still existed, traditions still mattered. But the music had opened hearts in ways that nothing else could, and every time she sat at that piano, she felt grateful for that first moment of courage. She had broken a rule gently, quietly, but in doing so, she had opened a door for others. Music had found its way back into their lives, not as noise or distraction, but as peace and grace. And as Maria looked around the chapel each evening at the sisters, the visitors, the candles, the flowers, she felt something deeper than happiness. She felt a quiet joy, the kind that stays with you long after the last note fades. Life at the convent had changed quietly but deeply. Even though no one spoke much about it, the feeling was clear. Things felt lighter, warmer, and more connected. Each evening, Maria sat at the piano as more villagers came to listen. Some brought candles, others simply sat in peace. The music had turned the chapel into a place where hearts healed without words. One day, something unexpected happened. A young man arrived at the convent with a notebook in his hand. He was polite and respectful, explaining to the Mother Superior that he wrote for the local newspaper. "I've heard about the music here," he said, "and I would like to write a small story about what you're doing. It has touched many people." The Mother Superior listened carefully. She didn't like too much attention, but she could see that the villagers appreciated what was happening. After a moment's thought, she nodded gently. "Write about peace," she said softly. "That's what this is about, not praise or fame, just peace." That evening, Maria played as usual. The young man sat quietly in the back, making notes, but also clearly moved by what he was witnessing. The sisters noticed his presence but trusted Maria's music to speak for itself. A week later, the article appeared in the local newspaper. It was a simple piece but written with care. It spoke about the quiet evenings of music at the convent, how the chapel had become a place of reflection for the whole community, how music, once silent, had now returned to bring peace. More villagers began to visit after that. Some came from nearby towns, curious but respectful, and each evening Maria welcomed them in her own quiet way, not with words, but with music. Inside the convent, a quiet confidence began to grow. The sisters had once followed the old rules strictly, but now they understood that this change wasn't a rebellion, it was something gentle and healing. Even the Mother Superior felt at ease as she watched Maria at the piano. Sometimes, she would sit in the last row of the chapel, her eyes closed, her lips moving silently in prayer while the music filled the space. For her too, the music had become a prayer, soft, sincere, and full of meaning. One evening, as Maria was finishing a gentle piece, an elderly woman approached her. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held out a small, worn book. "This belonged to my husband," she said quietly. "He played the piano before he passed, I think. You'll know what to do with it." Maria accepted the book with care. When she opened it later that night, she found it filled with old sheet music, beautiful songs, some familiar, some she had never seen. It was a gift from a stranger, but it felt like a sign. The music she had brought to life was now being shared back with her. Over the next few weeks, Maria began to play some of these old songs during the evening gatherings. Each new piece added a different feeling, sometimes joyful, sometimes full of longing. The visitors kept coming, and the sisters continued to listen. Music was no longer just a background to their prayers. It had become part of their lives. One afternoon, as the sisters gathered for their usual garden work, the Mother Superior spoke gently to Maria. "You have done something I did not expect," she said softly. "You have shown that music can be part of our faith, not a distraction from it. It was never about breaking rules. It was about bringing life back to this place." Maria felt a wave of peace at those words. It had taken courage to play that first note, to touch those keys in secret. But now the piano stood proud in the chapel, no longer dusty or forgotten. It had become a symbol not of rule-breaking but of healing and hope. That evening, a little boy arrived with his mother. The child sat close to the piano, his eyes wide with wonder as he listened. After Maria finished playing, he whispered, "I want to play one day too." Maria bent down and smiled kindly. "You will," she said gently, "and you'll play beautifully." The sisters, watching quietly, smiled as well. They understood something important, that music didn't just heal the past, it gave hope to the future. Maria sat back down at the piano and placed her hands gently on the keys. As she began to play again, the chapel filled with a quiet, beautiful sound. Outside, the sky was turning dark, but inside, there was light, a light that came from music, from shared peace, and from the courage of one woman who had dared to play. The quiet evenings of music at the convent had become something people looked forward to. Every night, as the sun set, and the candles in the chapel glowed softly, Maria would sit at the piano. Her music gently filled the space, wrapping everyone in calm. The sisters, once so bound by rules and silence, now embraced these moments. But something unexpected was happening to more people from outside the convent were coming. Not just villagers from nearby, but visitors from further away who had read the newspaper article or heard stories about the peaceful music at the small convent. They came with heavy hearts, with worries and grief. They came not for entertainment, but for peace, and the convent quietly welcomed them all. Maria noticed the visitors sitting quietly in the back. Some lit candles before sitting, some wept softly, but when they left, their faces looked softer, their steps lighter. Music was doing what words sometimes could not. It was healing. One evening, after Maria played a soft hymn, a woman approached her. She had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "My son is very sick. I haven't been able to sleep for weeks, but tonight, for the first time, I felt calm. Thank you for this peace." Maria didn't know what to say. Her music had come from a personal place, from her own longing, but now it was reaching people in ways she hadn't expected. She simply nodded gently and offered a warm smile. Inside the convent, the sisters began to talk more with each other. During meals, they shared little stories from their past. The walls that had once kept them quiet and distant now felt softer, more open. Music was not only changing how they prayed, it was changing how they lived. Even the Mother Superior had changed. Where she once seemed strict and distant, now she often sat near Maria during the music. Sometimes, she would join in quietly, pressing a few keys herself or humming a familiar tune. It was clear that the music had touched her too. It reminded her of something she thought she had left behind long ago. One afternoon, a small group of children from the village arrived. They were curious and excited, peeking into the chapel. The sisters allowed them to sit near the piano and watch Maria play. Their eyes sparkled with wonder as they listened. Afterward, one of the children shyly asked, "Can we try to?" Maria smiled warmly. She let each child press a few keys, showing them how music could come from their own fingers. Their laughter filled the chapel, soft and joyful. The sisters watched this simple scene with warmth in their hearts. Even the Mother Superior smiled, her eyes bright. The convent had quietly become more than a place of prayer. It had become a place where people from all walks of life could come to find peace, where children could feel joy, where the lonely could feel comfort. The piano, once untouched, was now the heart of it all. One evening, a man arrived with a gift for Maria. He carefully placed a small wooden stool beside the piano. "It belonged to my grandmother," he said quietly. "She loved music, and I think she would be happy knowing it's being used here now." Maria accepted the gift with a grateful heart. She understood that these small acts of kindness were part of something larger. Music had not only opened the hearts of the sisters, it was bringing the whole community together in a gentle, beautiful way. As the evenings passed, Maria began to teach simple songs to the other sisters. Some played softly on the flute, some sang quietly, their voices blending with the piano. Their music was simple but sincere, and every night, the chapel was filled with a sense of togetherness that words could not fully describe. Maria sometimes thought back to the first night she sat at the piano. She had been so nervous then, unsure and afraid of breaking the rules. But now, as she looked around at the sisters and visitors who gathered each evening, she felt only gratitude. The piano had been waiting, just as she had, waiting for someone to bring it back to life, waiting to fill the silent chapel with warmth again. And now, every evening as she played, Maria knew she wasn't just making music. She was sharing hope, quietly, gently, sincerely. Her music had turned the convent into a haven, a place where anyone could come and feel at peace. And as each note floated softly into the night, Maria felt deeply thankful, not just for the piano, but for the courage that had led her to play that very first note. By now, the convent was no longer just a quiet home for the sisters. It had become a place where villagers and travelers alike, they came to find peace. Evening after evening, soft music floated from the chapel. Candles flickered gently on the altar, casting a warm glow on the old stone walls. The piano, once dusty and untouched, now felt like the heart of this change. Maria sat there each night, her hands moving gently across the keys. The melodies she played were simple but full of feeling. Her music told stories of hope, of longing, of joy, and of comfort. The sisters embraced this new rhythm of life. They no longer just followed their routines. They shared quiet moments together, laughing softly as they remembered their own stories. Their work in the garden felt lighter, their prayers felt deeper. The music had opened their hearts not just to each other, but to the world outside the convent walls. One day, the Mother Superior called Maria to walk with her in the garden. The two walked slowly among the flowers and herbs. After a long silence, the Mother Superior spoke. "When I was young, I played music every day," she said softly. "But when I came here, I thought I had to leave that part of me behind." She paused, looking gently at Maria. "You have reminded me that music isn't something that takes us away from faith. It can bring us closer." Maria listened quietly. She felt grateful for those words. She knew how hard it must have been for the Mother Superior to admit that. That evening, something special happened. The Mother Superior herself sat at the piano beside Maria. Together they played a quiet duet, a simple tune, but filled with grace and love. The sisters watched in silent joy. Visitors in the chapel smiled softly, feeling honored to witness this moment. The news of the convent's evening music continued to spread. One day, a small group of young musicians from a nearby town arrived. They had heard about the peaceful evenings at the convent and had brought their instruments: a violin, a small harp, and a flute. They asked politely if they could play along with Maria. With a kind smile, Maria welcomed them. That evening, for the first time, the chapel was filled with not just piano music, but a gentle blend of instruments. The violin's sweet notes, the soft strum of the harp, and the flute's gentle melody all joined Maria's piano beautifully. The sound was tender and respectful, never loud, never overwhelming. The visitors sat quietly, their faces peaceful. The sisters swayed gently with the music, some closing their eyes in prayer. This night felt like another gift. Music was not just something from Maria's past anymore. It was something living, shared between old and young, between sisters and visitors, between the convent and the outside world. Maria felt this deeply as she played. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, but her heart felt fuller than ever. She had never expected that one quiet decision to sit at the piano one night would lead to all this. The convent's a simple rule of silence had given way to something more meaningful. Not chaos, not noise, but peaceful, healing music. Even though they had not planned it, a tradition had grown. Each evening became a time for music and reflection. There were no announcements, no formal gatherings, just people coming quietly, sitting in the chapel, and letting the music fill their hearts. That night, as the last notes of the evening faded, one of the young musicians approached Maria. He bowed his head slightly and said, "I've played music in many places, but here, in this chapel, it feels different. It feels pure." Maria smiled softly. She understood what he meant. The music here was not for applause or performance. It was for peace, for healing, for connection, for grace. The sisters gathered after the visitors left. They shared warm smiles, quietly grateful for how far they had come. Even the Mother Superior, who had once guarded the rules so carefully, now understood that sometimes change can bring light. The piano, standing gracefully in the chapel, seemed to belong there completely now. Its keys shone softly in the candlelight, a reminder of all the hands that had touched it and all the hearts it had touched. Maria sat quietly beside it, feeling peaceful. She knew that tomorrow and the days after, more visitors would come. Some would bring candles, some would bring flowers, some would bring nothing at all but a heavy heart looking for comfort. And every evening Maria would be there at the piano, ready to offer what she could, not with many words, but with music, soft, healing, human music. The seasons had passed gently since Maria first sat at the old piano. What had started as one quiet night of music had grown into something much larger, a tradition, a comfort, a gift. Every evening, the chapel filled with soft candlelight, gentle music, and peaceful hearts. People from nearby villages and distant places came quietly, drawn by the simple beauty of the music. Some stayed for a few minutes, others for hours, all left feeling a little lighter, a little more at peace. The Sisters had embraced this change fully. Where once there had been strict rules and silence, now there was warmth and welcome. They still prayed, still tended the garden, still worked together, but now their days ended with music that felt like a shared prayer. Maria continued to sit at the piano each evening, her fingers moving gracefully over the keys. Her music was never grand or loud. It remained soft, thoughtful, and full of heart. Visitors brought small tokens of thanks, flowers, candles, even old pieces of sheet music passed down in families. The chapel slowly became filled with these quiet offerings. A fresh flower always rested on the piano. Candles glowed gently on a small stand near the altar. One evening, the Mother Superior sat beside Maria as she played. When the music paused, she spoke softly. "You know, Maria, this piano was silent. For many years, no one dared to touch it. But you sat here and brought life back to this chapel, not with noise, but with love." Maria listened quietly. She didn't need praise. Her reward was seeing the peaceful faces in the chapel every night. But the Mother Superior's words meant something deep. It was an acknowledgement that music had healed not just the visitors but the sisters themselves. A few days later, something special happened. A young woman came to the convent, carrying a small case. Inside was a simple, beautiful violin. She approached Maria after the evening music, her voice soft. "I used to play this violin before my life became too busy. May I leave it here, so that music will always have a home?" Maria accepted the violin with care. The next evening, she invited one of the younger sisters who had once mentioned learning violin as a child to sit beside her. Together they played a gentle duet. The piano and violin blended softly, filling the chapel with a new, tender sound. The sisters watched with quiet joy. Visitors sat still, soaking in the warmth of the music. It was a simple moment, but full of meaning, a sign that music would live on here, even after Maria's fingers no longer touched the keys. Maria knew she was getting older. Her hands, though still steady, sometimes felt tired, but she felt peace knowing that the chapel would remain a place where music was welcome. The piano that had once sat dusty and forgotten was now loved, cared for, and played by many hands. The Mother Superior, too, seemed at peace. She often sat quietly during the music, her eyes closed, her face soft with reflection. She knew that allowing Maria to play that first night had been a turning point, one that had brought grace back into their lives. One quiet evening, as the candles glowed and the chapel filled with soft music, Maria looked around slowly. The visitors, the sisters, the children, they were all part of this living tradition now. She realized this was no longer just her. The journey, the music belonged to everyone who had come to listen, to heal, and to find peace. And so, Maria made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue to play as long as her fingers allowed, and when the time came that she could no longer sit at the piano, others would continue. Because this gift was never really hers alone. Music had changed the convent. It had softened old rules, opened hearts, and connected strangers. It had reminded everyone that peace could be found in the simplest things, in gentle melodies, shared silence, and quiet courage. That night, Maria played a soft, familiar tune, a simple lullaby from the old sheet music she had found long ago. As she played the final note, she looked at the piano with deep gratitude. It had waited patiently for someone to return to it, and she had answered that call. The sisters gathered around her quietly. No applause, no words, just warm smiles and peaceful hearts. The chapel glowed with candlelight, and outside, the stars shone brightly. Maria felt a calm joy deep inside. She knew that the music would continue here for years to come, not because of her alone, but because of what had grown between them all, a shared love, a shared peace, a shared gift. And so, the piano remained a symbol of healing, hope, and quiet courage, a reminder that sometimes the simplest act, pressing a key and letting a note ring out, can change everything.